10 years. 10 years since I've seen them. Will they even recognize me? I'd changed, of course. The awkward, insecure girl they'd shipped off to boarding school had, out of necessity, grown into a woman. I'd learned to be self reliant, to navigate the world on my own terms, to survive. But beneath the surface, a tiny, fragile part of me still yearned for their approval, for their acceptance, for a sliver of the love they so freely lavished on Olivia. I scanned the crowd, my gaze searching, hoping, praying for a familiar face. My mother, with her impeccable blonde bob and her designer suit. My father, tall and imposing, his presence always commanding attention. Or Olivia, my perfect older sister, with her dazzling smile and her effortless charm. The golden child, the one who could do no wrong. But there was no one. Just a sea of strangers, their faces blurred and indistinct, their happiness a painful reminder of what I lacked. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of anxiety. They were probably just running late. Traffic in this city was legendary. It didn't mean anything. I pulled out my phone, the familiar weight comforting in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, finding my mother's number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. What would I even say? It had been so long. I pressed the button, the ringing tone echoing in my ear. Straight to voicemail, of course. Her message was her usual brisk, impersonal greeting, the one she probably used for telemarketers and wrong numbers. Hi, you've reached Margaret Whitmore. Please leave a message. I didn't leave a message. What was the point? I tried my father's number next. He was always busy, always in meetings, always unavailable. No answer, just the ringing tone, a monotonous drone that mirrored the growing emptiness in my chest. Just like always. He was probably in some important meeting, closing some multi-million-dollar deal, too busy to be bothered with his forgotten daughter. I didn't even bother waiting for the voicemail. I even tried Olivia's number, a long shot I knew. We'd never been close. She'd always been too busy with her friends, her social life, her everything, to have time for her awkward younger sister. Unsurprisingly, there was no answer there either. I sat down heavily on one of the hard plastic chairs, my backpack slipping to the floor with a thud. The minutes ticked by, each one an agonizing reminder of my isolation. I watched families reunite, lovers embrace, friends laugh, and I just sat there, alone, invisible. I checked the flight information board again, just to be sure. Flight BA-247 from London arrived. 14:35. It was now 16:15, almost 2 hours. The hope that had flickered within me, that tiny, fragile ember of possibility, was extinguished, snuffed out by the cold, hard reality of my situation. They forgot. They actually forgot. The words echoed in my mind, a brutal, undeniable truth. They hadn't just forgotten to pick me up. They'd forgotten me, forgotten that I existed, forgotten that I was their daughter, their sister. But then a darker, more insidious thought crept in. A suspicion I'd tried to bury for years, or did they? Was this deliberate? Was this their final cruel way of cutting me out of their lives? Of showing me once and for all that I didn't belong? I stood up, my legs feeling strangely weak, my hands trembling. The tears that pricked at my eyes were not tears of sadness, but of rage. A cold, burning rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for years, finally erupting. I wouldn't cry, I wouldn't beg, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I was done. Done with the waiting, done with the hoping, done with the trying. I walked away from the arrivals gate, my steps purposeful now, my gaze fixed on the exit sign. I was leaving. Leaving the airport, leaving my family, leaving my old life behind. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Outside, the late afternoon sun beat down on the pavement, the air thick with the smell of exhaust and the sounds of the city. The world felt different out here, away from the sterile, controlled environment of the airport. It felt chaotic, unpredictable, and, strangely, liberating. Taxis lined up at the curb, their drivers leaning against their vehicles, hawking their services to the arriving passengers. I ignored them, walking towards the designated pickup area, my mind still reeling. My emotions a tangled mess of anger, hurt, and a strange sense of anticipation. And then I saw it, a sleek black luxury car, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, I think. idling at the curb a few feet away from me. It looked out of place, a symbol of wealth and privilege, amidst the more mundane vehicles surrounding it. The driver, a man in a dark suit and a crisp white shirt, was leaning out the window, scanning the crowd. "Miss Montgomery?" he asked, his gaze settling on me. Miss Montgomery? It wasn't my name. Obviously, he had mistaken me for someone else. I should have corrected him. I should have told him he had the wrong person. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I hesitated, my mind racing. What was I doing? This was insane. This was dangerous. But another part of me, a reckless, defiant part, urged me on. Why not? What do I have to lose? I had nothing left to lose. My family had made that abundantly clear. I was alone, abandoned, forgotten. What did it matter if I got into a stranger's car? What was the worst that could happen? "Yes," I said, my voice sounding surprisingly calm, even to my own ears. "That's me." The driver smiled, a brief, professional smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Right this way, miss," he said, opening the back door for me with a practiced flourish. "Mr. West is expecting you." Mr. West. I had no idea who Mr. West was. But it didn't matter. He was a stranger. And right now, a stranger was exactly what I needed. A blank slate, a chance to escape. I slid into the back seat, sinking into the plush leather, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the humid afternoon air. The car smelled of expensive leather and something else. Something subtle, masculine, intriguing. As the car pulled away from the airport, I looked out the window, watching the familiar landmarks disappear behind me. The control tower, the parking garages, the arrivals gate. The place where my old life had officially ended. "Just drive," I said to the driver, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain. I just wanted to go. "Of course. Is there a particular place you'd like to go?" he asked politely, his voice calm and reassuring. I shook my head. "Nowhere in particular," I replied, the words feeling heavy with meaning. I had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his expression curious, perhaps even a little concerned. He seemed to sense my distress, my lostness, but he didn't press me. He didn't ask any questions. He just nodded and turned his attention back to the road. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but back to that life. Back to the cold, empty mansion, to the disapproving stares, to the constant feeling of inadequacy. Back to the family that had never really been a family. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat, letting the hum of the engine and the motion of the car lull me into a state of numbness. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. I was going to disappear, to reinvent myself, to become someone else, someone they would never recognize, someone they would never be able to hurt again. It was a terrifying thought, but also exhilarating. I was finally free, and this time, I was going to stay that way. The open road stretched before me, a symbol of the unknown, of the possibilities, of the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The hotel room was opulent, a far cry from the budget motels I'd been expecting. The driver, whose name I still didn't know, had simply driven to the most expensive hotel in the city, assuming, I suppose, that Miss Montgomery would expect nothing less. I hadn't corrected him. I'd simply accepted the key card, thanked him politely, and retreated to my room, feeling like an imposter in a world of luxury I didn't belong in. But the anonymity of the hotel room was exactly what I needed. A place to think, to plan, to disappear. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, my new cheap phone in my hand. It was time to cut the ties, to erase Sienna Brooks from existence. Time to disappear completely. At first, the social media. My Facebook account filled with carefully curated photos of a life that had never really been mine. Pictures of family vacations I'd barely tolerated, of smiles I'd faked, of a happiness that had always been a lie. I deactivated it, the process surprisingly quick and painless. Next, Instagram. My carefully crafted online persona, the perfect daughter, the successful student, the ghost. I deleted the account, erasing all the photos, all the comments, all the evidence of my former life. Twitter, gone. LinkedIn, gone. Even my old email accounts, the ones I'd used for school and job applications, deleted. I unsubscribed from every newsletter, every mailing list, every online service I could think of. I was systematically dismantling my digital footprint, erasing myself from the virtual world. It felt good, liberating, like I was shedding a skin that had never fit, a life that had never been truly mine. Then, the phone. My old phone. The one with all my contacts, my messages, my memories. I took out the SIM card, the tiny chip that held the key to my past, and stared at it for a long moment. It was the last link, the final connection. I snapped the SIM card in half, the plastic cracking with a satisfying sound. Then, I tossed the pieces, along with my old phone, into the hotel room's trash can. It was a symbolic act, a final, decisive break. I bought a new phone, a cheap, prepaid model from a nearby convenience store, along with a burner SIM card. Untraceable, unreachable. I would only use this phone for essential communications, for building my new life. I sat back on the bed, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Fear, yes. Uncertainty, definitely. But also a sense of exhilaration, a sense of freedom. I was adrift, untethered, with no safety net, but I was also in control. For the first time in my life, I was making my own choices, charting my own course, creating my own destiny. And then the guilt crept in, the nagging voice of doubt, of obligation, of family. I should call them, I should tell them I was okay, I should explain. I picked up the new phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. I needed more time. Time to figure out who I was, what I wanted, what I was going to do. I decided to check on them. I turned on my old phone and dialed our old number. I had to hear it one last time. The phone rang and rang, then finally went to voicemail. I waited for the beep, but didn't leave a message. I did this for a few days, checking to see if they even noticed. Days later, I couldn't explain why, but I still had my old phone, tucked away in a drawer, a silent reminder of my past. I hadn't turned it on in days, hadn't dared to. But today, something compelled me to. I powered it on, the screen flickering to life, displaying the familiar wallpaper, the familiar icons. And then, I saw it. The missed call notification. Several of them, in fact, all from the same number, my mother's. My heart skipped a beat. They had noticed. They were looking for me. I hesitantly checked my voicemail, my hand trembling. There were several messages, each one more frantic than the last. Mother, voicemail. Sienna, where are you? We were delayed. Call us back. Her voice was strained, annoyed, but not worried. Not really. It was the voice of a woman inconvenienced, not a mother desperate to find her missing daughter. The delayed was a lie, of course. They hadn't been delayed. They'd forgotten. Or they hadn't cared. I listened to the message again, my jaw clenching, my anger rising. They hadn't even bothered to call until days later. Days! And even then, it was only because they'd noticed I was gone. Probably because Olivia had needed something. They didn't even notice for days. Figures. I hung up the phone, my face a mask of cold determination. Too late, I whispered, the words of promise, a vow. Too late for apologies, too late for explanations. Too late for reconciliation. I was done. Done with the lies, done with the neglect, done with the family that had never really been a family. I was Sarafina West now. And Sarafina West didn't look back. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing a reception area that screamed power and understated elegance. Polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a breathtaking panoramic view of the city and modern art that probably cost more than my entire education. This wasn't just an office, it was a statement, a declaration of dominance. I took a deep breath, smoothing down the borrowed dress I was wearing. Thankfully, Miss Montgomery. And I seemed to be the same size. I still felt like an imposter, a fraud playing a role I wasn't prepared for. But I couldn't back down now. I had to see this through. A receptionist, impeccably dressed and radiating an air of cool efficiency, looked up from her computer. Miss Montgomery? she asked, her voice perfectly neutral. Yes, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm here to see Mr. West. She nodded, gesturing towards a set of double doors made of dark, richly stained wood. Right this way. As I followed her, I tried to project an air of confidence, of belonging. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Fake it till you make it, I told myself. It was a mantra I'd repeated countless times over the past few days. The doors opened into a vast corner office, even more impressive than the reception area. The view was even more spectacular, the city sprawling beneath us like a conquered kingdom. And behind a massive glass-top desk sat Damian West. He stood as I entered, extending a hand. He was older than I'd initially thought, probably mid-40s, but with a presence that made him seem larger than life. He had sharp, intelligent eyes, a strong jawline, and a hint of gray at his temples that only added to his aura of authority. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, but there was something unconventional about him. A glint of steel in his gaze, a hint of something untamed. So, Miss Montgomery, he began, his voice smooth and deep, a voice that commanded attention. Or should I say, Miss Brooks? My carefully constructed composure almost shattered. I froze, my hand still clasped in his, my heart pounding against my ribs. How did you... The question died on my lips. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I have resources, he said, as if reading my mind. I make it my business to know who I'm dealing with. It's a necessary precaution in my line of work. He paused, his gaze sweeping over me, assessing, evaluating. But that's not important. What is important is why. He gestured towards a chair opposite his desk, and I sank into it, the plush leather a stark contrast to the hard plastic chairs of the airport. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a specimen under a microscope. They forgot me, I blurted out, the words rushing out in a torrent of pent-up emotion. They didn't even care enough to pick me up from the airport. And then, I told him, everything. The years of neglect, the constant comparisons to Olivia, the feeling of being invisible, of being unwanted. The final, crushing blow of being abandoned at the airport. The desperate, impulsive decision to get into his car, to disappear, to start over. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his blue eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that was both unnerving and strangely comforting. He didn't judge. He didn't offer platitudes. He just listened. It was the first time in my life I felt truly heard. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. I see, he said finally, his voice devoid of any discernible emotion. And what do you want now, Miss Brooks? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. A chance, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a desperate need to prove myself. A chance to start over, a chance to become someone else. Someone stronger. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed his face. I believe in second chances, Miss Brooks, he said, his voice taking on a slightly warmer tone. And I see something in you. Potential. A certain resilience, a fire that I recognize. He paused, his gaze holding mine. I'm willing to offer you a job, a fresh start, but you'll have to earn it. This world, it's not for the faint of heart. It demands dedication, loyalty, and a willingness to adapt, to be ruthless when necessary. I didn't hesitate. I understand, I said, my voice firm. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm adaptable. He nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Good, because I don't tolerate failure, Miss Brooks. I expect results. You'll get them, I promised, my voice filled with a conviction I didn't quite feel, but desperately wanted to. Then we have an agreement, he said, extending his hand again. Welcome to West Enterprises, miss? He paused, a question in his eyes. It was a subtle invitation, a chance to choose my new identity. I thought for a moment, the name forming on my lips almost instinctively. Sarafina, I said. Sarafina West. It was a name I'd always loved, a name that represented strength, beauty, and a touch of mystery. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise, perhaps even approval in his expression. Sarafina, he repeated, testing the sound of it. It suits you. And in that moment, Sienna Brooks truly disappeared. And Sarafina West, the woman I was about to become, stepped into the light. The first few months at West Enterprises were a trial by fire. I started at the very bottom, as a personal assistant to one of the junior executives, a man named Mark, who was ambitious, demanding, and openly resentful of my presence. He saw me as a threat, a potential rival, and he made my life as difficult as possible. I fetched coffee, ran errands, scheduled meetings, and performed countless other menial tasks, all while trying to learn the intricacies of the business, the complex web of relationships, and the unspoken rules of this cutthroat world. Serafina, get me the Peterson file, Mark would bark, his voice dripping with condescension. And make it snappy. I haven't got all day. Serafina, reschedule my lunch with Mr. Henderson. Tell him something came up, something important. Serafina, this report is sloppy. Redo it, and this time, try to use your brain. I gritted my teeth, swallowed my pride, and did as I was told. I worked late nights, arrived early mornings, and absorbed everything I could. I studied the company's financials, researched its competitors, and learned the personalities of the key players. I was determined to prove myself, to show Damien and myself that I was worthy of the chance he'd given me. The other employees were a mixed bag. Some were helpful, offering advice and guidance, sensing my genuine desire to learn. Others were hostile, resentful of my rapid rise. For even though I started at the bottom, Damien made it clear that I was under his protection, that I was to be given opportunities. She's West's pet, I overheard one woman whisper to another in the break room. He sees something in her, thinks she's special. She's just sleeping her way to the top, another woman said, her voice dripping with venom. I ignored them, focusing on my work, on my goals, on my transformation. I was learning the language of power, the art of manipulation, the game, and I was starting to enjoy it. The late nights, studying documents, learning and figuring things out, it made me sharper. I can do this. I will do this. There were moments, of course, when I doubted myself, when the weight of my past, the pain of my family's betrayal, threatened to overwhelm me, when I felt like an imposter, a fraud, pretending to be someone I wasn't. But then I would remember the airport, the feeling of being forgotten, of being invisible. And I would push myself harder, work longer, fight my way back to the surface. I was also starting to see glimpses of Damien's own past, hints of a darkness, a complexity that mirrored my own. He rarely spoke about his personal life, but occasionally he would let slip a detail, a fragment of a story, that suggested he, too, had come from a place of pain, of struggle. It was a connection, unspoken but understood, that forged a bond between us. A bond that went beyond the typical mentor-protege relationship. I was learning the ropes, yes, but I was also learning something else, that I was stronger, more resilient, and more capable than I had ever imagined. Sarafina West was not just a name. It was a persona, a shield, a weapon. And I was wielding it with increasing skill and confidence. I had built a fortress around myself, a carefully constructed wall of ambition, success, and a new identity. But the past, I was learning, had a way of seeping through the cracks, of haunting the present, of reminding you that you could never truly escape who you were. One evening, I was working late, preparing for a major presentation to a potential investor. I was engrossed in the work, lost in the details of the financial projections, when I saw it. A small news item buried on page 6 of a business journal. Whitmore Industries faces bankruptcy. My breath caught in my throat. Whitmore Industries, my father's company, the empire he'd built, the legacy he'd so fiercely protected. Crumbling. I read the article, my heart pounding, my hands trembling. The details were vague, but the message was clear. The company was in serious trouble, facing mounting debts, declining profits, and scandal. Olivia's name was mentioned, linked to a series of questionable decisions and financial irregularities. The golden child, tarnished. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Satisfaction, yes. A flicker of vindictive pleasure at seeing their perfect world fall apart. But also sadness. A deep, aching sadness for the family I'd once longed to be a part of, for the life I'd never had. I closed the journal, pushing it away, trying to shut out the memories, the feelings, the ghosts, but they wouldn't stay buried. A few days later, I was walking through the city on my way to a lunch meeting when I saw her, a woman standing outside a coffee shop, her back to me. But I recognized the distinctive shade of blonde hair, the perfectly tailored suit, the familiar way she held herself. It couldn't be. I stopped, my heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat. The woman turned and our eyes met. It was Olivia. She looked different. Older, of course, but also worn, haggard. The bright, dazzling smile was gone, replaced by a look of defeat. She recognized me too. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth forming a silent O of surprise. "Sienna," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the city noise. I froze, caught between the urge to flee and the need to confront her, to face the past, to face the sister who had always overshadowed me, who had always forgotten me. But before I could speak, before I could decide what to do, she turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a long moment, stunned, shaken. The encounter had been brief, fleeting, but it had ripped open old wounds, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath my carefully constructed facade. My penthouse apartment was a sanctuary, a haven of sleek, modern design filled with carefully chosen pieces of art, expensive furniture, and the breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a world away from the cramped, cluttered apartment I'd once shared with memories. A world away from the forgotten daughter, Sienna Brooks. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the final details of a major acquisition when my assistant, Chloe, buzzed me on the intercom. "Ms. West," she said, her voice hesitant. "There's a call for you. A Mrs. Margaret Whitmore?" The name hit me like a physical blow. Whitmore, my maiden name. The name I'd buried, the name I'd tried to forget. My heart skipped a beat. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. Whitmore. After all these years. What did they want? After all these years, what do they want? I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. Sarafina West was not a woman who trembled. Sarafina West was in control. "Whitmore?" I repeated, my voice carefully neutral, betraying none of the turmoil raging within me. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am," Chloe replied. "She said it was urgent." Urgent. Of course it was. They only ever contacted me when it was urgent, when they needed something. A wave of anger, cold and sharp, washed over me. Anger at their audacity, at their hypocrisy, at their selfishness. They had thrown me away, erased me from their lives, and now, after all this time, they had the nerve to call me to ask for my help? But beneath the anger, there was something else. Curiosity. A flicker of morbid fascination. What could possibly be so urgent that they would reach out to me, the daughter they had disowned? What game are they playing now? I considered ignoring the call, refusing to speak to them, letting them stew in their own mess. It would be so easy, so satisfying, but I couldn't. I needed to know, I needed to see them, to hear their pleas, to witness their downfall. It wasn't about revenge, not anymore. It was about closure, about finally closing the door on that chapter of my life on my own terms. "Put her through," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, even to my own ears. "But Chloe, under no circumstance am I to be disturbed during this call, and I do not want this number given out again. Am I understood?" "Yes, ma'am." There was a click, and then her voice. "Sienna," Margaret Whitmore said, her voice hesitant, strained. "Is that you? It's Mother. We need your help." Mother. The word felt foreign on her tongue, alien. She hadn't been my mother for a long time. Not since the day they'd sent me away. "This is Sarafina West," I corrected her, my voice cold and distant, devoid of any emotion. "Who is this?" I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to hear her acknowledge my new identity, my new life. The life they had forced me to create. There was a pause, a moment of stunned silence. Then she spoke again, her voice even more frantic. "Sienna, please, it's us. We're in trouble. We need you." I leaned back in my chair, my gaze fixed on the city skyline. the glittering lights a stark contrast to the darkness that had descended on my family. Trouble? I repeated, my voice laced with a hint of amusement. What kind of trouble could the Whitmores possibly be in? She started to explain, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of desperation. It was about the company, about financial ruin, about Olivia. The golden child, the perfect daughter, had apparently made some mistakes. Mistakes that had brought the entire Whitmore empire to the brink of collapse. I listened, my expression impassive, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. They needed my help. The daughter they had betrayed, the daughter they had abandoned, the daughter they had deemed worthless. They were now begging for my help. The irony was almost poetic. But as I listened, I realized something. It wasn't just about the company. It was about them, about their pride, their reputation, their survival. They were desperate, and they were finally, acknowledging my existence. I let her talk, let her plead, let her grovel. And then, when she finally ran out of steam, when the silence stretched between us, heavy and expectant, I spoke. "I'll meet with you," I said, my voice calm and deliberate, "but on my terms, and at a location that I chose." I chose the restaurant carefully. A high-end establishment, frequented by the city's elite, a place where power and money were the currency of the day. It was a world away from the stuffy, formal dining room of the Whitmore mansion, a world where I held the power. I arrived precisely on time, dressed in a designer suit that screamed confidence and success. I'd spent years cultivating this image, this persona, this armor. And tonight, I needed it more than ever. They were already there, seated at a secluded table in a corner of the restaurant. My mother, my father, and Olivia. They looked smaller, diminished. The years had not been kind to them. My mother, Margaret, rushed towards me, her arms outstretched, her face a mixture of relief and guilt. "Sienna, darling," she exclaimed, attempting to embrace me. "We've been so worried. Where have you been?" I stepped back, avoiding her touch, my body stiffening at her false affection. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, my voice cool and formal. "Mr. Whitmore, Olivia." I acknowledged them with a curt nod, refusing to use their familial titles. They were strangers to me now, less than strangers. My father, Richard, looked haggard, defeated. The arrogance, the power, the authority. It was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Sienna," he said, his voice hoarse, "we need your help. The company, it's in trouble. We're on the verge of bankruptcy." Olivia, my perfect sister, looked broken. Her usual bright, dazzling smile was gone, replaced by a tearful, desperate expression. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup smudged, her clothes rumpled. It was a far cry from the polished, flawless image she had always projected. "We made mistakes, Sienna," she said, her voice choked with sobs. "We were wrong. Please, you have to help us." I looked at them, at this family that had betrayed me, abandoned me, left me to rot in prison. And I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity, just emptiness. "Help you?" I repeated, my voice devoid of any emotion. "After what you did?" My mother, ever the actress, tried to play the victim. "We were desperate," she said, her voice trembling. "We didn't know what else to do. We were trying to protect the family." "Protect the family?" I scoffed, a harsh, bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You protected yourselves. You sacrificed me. You framed your own daughter, sent her to prison, and erased her from your lives." My father, his face ashen, tried to interrupt. We know we made a mistake, but we're your family." Family, the word was a mockery, a cruel joke. "Family?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You were never my family. Not after what you did." I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze cold and unforgiving. "You made your choice. You chose your precious company, your reputation, your lies over me, and now you have to live with the consequences. I should have known they only wanted me for something, and they started to plead, to beg, to offer anything. Money, power, a place back in the family. but their words were meaningless, empty. They had nothing to offer me, nothing I wanted. The restaurant was bustling with activity, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the soft music playing in the background. But in our little corner, a silent drama was playing out. A drama of betrayal, regret, and finality. My family continued to plead, their voices rising in desperation, their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and shame. They offered apologies, excuses, promises, but it was all too little, too late. I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor, the sound sharp and decisive. It was time to end this. I suggest seeking help elsewhere, I said, my voice cutting through their desperate pleas. I have a meeting to get to. I rejected them, coldly, calmly, finally. Olivia, my perfect sister, reached out, grabbing my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. Please, she begged, her voice choked with sobs. Don't you even care? We're your family. I looked down at her hand, at her desperate grip, and felt nothing. No pity, no empathy, no connection. You reap what you sow, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It was a simple truth, a cold, hard fact. They had sown the seeds of their own destruction, and now they were reaping the bitter harvest. I gently but firmly pried her fingers from my arm, breaking the last physical connection between us. And then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel anything. It should feel good, shouldn't it? This revenge, this victory. But it doesn't. It feels empty. I had imagined this moment countless times, fantasized about it, dreamed about it. I had envisioned myself gloating, triumphant, reveling in their downfall. But now that it was here, it felt hollow, meaningless. The truth was, revenge hadn't brought me the satisfaction I'd craved. It hadn't erased the pain, hadn't filled the void, hadn't healed me. True freedom isn't about getting even, it's about moving on. And it was about letting go of the past, of the anger, of the hate. It was about building a new life, a life free from the shadows of my family, a life defined by my own choices, my own actions, my own success. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air and took a deep breath. The city lights twinkled around me, a vast, indifferent expanse of humanity. And I was just one small part of it. A woman who had been broken, betrayed, and abandoned. But also a woman who had survived, who had rebuilt herself, who had become someone else. Sienna Brooks was gone, forever. And Sarafina West, she was finally free. Free to live, to love, to be happy on her own terms. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. The conference room was a sterile, high-tech space, all glass and steel and sharp angles. It was the kind of room where fortunes were made and lost, where empires were built and destroyed. And today, I was the one in control. I stood at the head of the long, polished table, facing a panel of seasoned executives, their faces a mixture of skepticism and anticipation. They were representatives of a major tech company, a potential acquisition target that could solidify West Enterprises' position as a leader in the industry. It was the biggest deal of my career, so always the culmination of years of hard work, of proving myself, of becoming Sarafina West. I began my presentation, my voice calm and confident, my words precise and persuasive. I laid out the strategic rationale for the acquisition, the financial projections, the potential synergies. I anticipated their questions, addressed their concerns, and countered their objections with a quiet authority that commanded respect. I was no longer the invisible daughter, the forgotten child, the failure. I was a force to be reckoned with, a woman in control of her destiny, a woman who knew her worth, a woman who belonged here. The negotiations were intense, stretching over several hours, a battle of wills, a dance of numbers, a game. But I was prepared. I'd done my research, I knew the numbers, I understood the stakes, and I wasn't going to back down. Damien sat beside me, silent but observant, his presence a source of strength and support. He'd given me this opportunity, this chance to prove myself, and I wasn't going to let him down. I wasn't going to let myself down. There were moments of tension, of doubt, of almost failure. But I held my ground, pushing back, negotiating fiercely, refusing to compromise on the key points. I was playing to win, and I was winning. Finally, after hours of grueling negotiations, we reached an agreement. The deal was done. A multi-billion-dollar acquisition secured. A victory for West Enterprises, and a victory for me. A wave of relief, of exhilaration washed over me. I had done it. I had proven myself, not just to Damien, not just to the world, but to myself. The executives shook my hand, their faces filled with a newfound respect. They saw me now. They saw my strength, my intelligence, my power. Damien smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Well done, Sarafina," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You exceeded all expectations." "Thank you, Damien," I replied, meeting his gaze. "I couldn't have done it without you." It was true. He had given me the opportunity, the guidance, the belief in myself that I had lacked for so long. He had seen something in me, something that my own family had failed to see. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a brief, almost intimate gesture. "You did this, Sarafina," he said, his voice low and intense. "You earned it." There was something in his eyes, a flicker of something more than just professional admiration, a hint of connection, a spark of possibility. Later that night, after the celebrations, after the champagne toasts, after the congratulations, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city lights. The same city that had once seemed so cold and indifferent now felt vibrant, alive, full of possibilities. I had come a long way from the lost, abandoned girl who had arrived at the airport years ago. I had built a new life, a new identity, a new future. I had achieved success, power, independence. I had proven myself to myself, but beneath the surface, a part of me still ached. The wounds of the past, the scars of betrayal, they were still there. A constant reminder of what I had lost, what I had been forced to leave behind. The victory was sweet, yes, but it was also bittersweet. Because true victory, I was beginning to realize, wasn't about conquering others. It was about conquering yourself. And that battle was far from over. The deal was done. And I was one step closer to fully being the woman I now was. The news came unexpectedly in the form of a discreetly worded email from a private investigator I'd hired months ago, more out of curiosity than any real desire for contact. I'd wanted to know what had happened to my family after their downfall. I'd told myself it was for practical reasons, to ensure they couldn't interfere with my new life. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was a lingering thread, a connection I couldn't quite sever. The email contained a single sentence. "Olivia Whitmore has requested a meeting." My breath caught in my throat. Olivia, my sister, the golden child. The one who had betrayed me, who had watched them drag me away, who had smiled. My first instinct was to refuse, to ignore the request, to pretend I'd never seen it, to maintain the distance, the wall I'd so carefully constructed around myself, but I couldn't. A part of me, a small, stubborn part, needed to know, needed to see her, to hear her, to understand. I hesitated for a long time, staring at the email, my mind racing. The memories flooded back, the pain, the anger, the betrayal. Could I face her? Could I face the past? I considered the alternatives. I could ignore her, pretend she didn't exist, continue living my life as Sarafina West, the successful, independent woman who had no need of a family. It would be easier, safer, less painful, but it would also be a lie, a denial of who I was, of where I'd come from. The past, no matter how much I tried to bury it, was still a part of me. And perhaps facing it, confronting it, was the only way to truly move on. I made the arrangements, carefully, cautiously, a neutral location, a public place, a time when I knew I would be strong. I wasn't going to let her see me vulnerable, not again. The meeting was awkward. Olivia looked different. Older, of course, but also smaller, defeated. The spark, the confidence, the arrogance, it was gone. She looked like a woman who had been through hell, which I suppose she had. Sienna, she began, her voice hesitant, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and hope. Sarafina, I corrected her, my voice cold. It's Sarafina now. She flinched but nodded. Sarafina, she repeated. I wanted to apologize for everything, for what we did to you. It was wrong, unforgivable. She talked for a long time, explaining, justifying, begging for forgiveness. She told me about the company's collapse, about my parents' imprisonment, about her own struggles. She told me about the guilt, the shame, the regret. I listened, my expression impassive, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to forgive her, but I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The wounds were too deep, the betrayal too profound, the trust shattered. I appreciate the apology, Olivia, I said finally, my voice devoid of any emotion. But it doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring back the years I lost. It doesn't erase the pain you caused. She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I know, she whispered. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that I regret it every single day. I stood up, ending the meeting. Goodbye, Olivia, I said. I walked away, leaving her sitting there, alone with her regrets. I didn't know if I would ever forgive her. I didn't know if I could forgive her. But I knew one thing. I was no longer defined by her, or by my family, or by the past. I was Sarafina West, and I was free. The encounter left a bitter taste, but I knew I was no longer that person. The city stretched before me, a vast, glittering expanse of concrete, steel, and glass. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse, the wind whipping through my hair, the night air cool against my skin. It was a view I never tired of, a constant reminder of how far I'd come. I'd made it. I'd built a new life, a new identity, a new empire. I was successful, powerful, independent. I had everything I'd ever wanted, everything I'd ever dreamed of, and yet there was a hollowness, an emptiness that lingered beneath the surface, a sense of disconnection. I had achieved everything I'd set out to achieve, but at what cost? I thought of my family, of the meeting with Olivia, of the years of pain and betrayal. I had avenged myself, yes, but the revenge had felt hollow. It hadn't brought me the peace I'd craved. I thought of Damien, of his support, his guidance, his belief in me. He was the one person who had seen through my facade, who had recognized the strength beneath the vulnerability, the potential beneath the pain. He was a friend, a mentor, perhaps something more. But I had kept him at arm's length, afraid to let anyone get too close, afraid to trust. I thought of Sienna Brooks, the girl I had been, the girl I had buried. She was still there, a part of me, a shadow self that would always haunt me. But she was no longer in control. I had taken the reins. I had steered my life in a new direction. I had become someone else. But who was that someone? Was Sarafina West just a mask, a persona, a shield against the world? Or was she me? The real me, the woman I was always meant to be? I didn't have the answers, not yet. But I knew one thing. I was no longer running. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer afraid. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. The city lights twinkled below me, a vast, interconnected web of humanity. And I was a part of it. A small part, yes, but a significant one. I had built this life, this empire, this identity from nothing. From the ashes of my past, from the wreckage of my family, from the betrayal. I had risen like a phoenix, and I had soared. But now it was time to land, to connect, to feel. I turned away from the view, walking back inside towards my office. I had work to do, plans to make, a future to build. But this time, it wouldn't be about revenge. It wouldn't be about proving myself. It wouldn't be about running away, and it would be about living, truly living, on my own terms, with my own choices, with my own heart. I sat down at my desk, the city lights reflecting in the polished surface, and smiled. A genuine smile this time. A smile that reached my eyes. A smile that said, I'm here. I'm alive, and I'm ready. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was also filled with possibilities. And I, Sarafina West, the woman who had risen from the ashes, was ready to embrace it, all of it. The good, the bad, the unknown, because I was finally truly free. And this time I was going to live my life to the fullest, on my own terms, and with no regrets. The horizon was clear, and I was ready to fly.